This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. It was, I think, the philosopher Edward de Bono, shortly before setting up U2, who first formally framed the idea that there is no point having a mind if you never change it. Some self-important gob on a stick used it several years later as the first line for a book called some odd nonsense like How Not to Be Wrong. But it runs through the time we spend together like Blackpool through a stick of rock. I don't know why I get so repelled by the idea of never changing my mind. I don't know whether it is a relatively recent development. I can't remember what this show was like when I started doing it. Can you? Well, most of you can't because some of you weren't born, but you certainly weren't listening. And why am I mentioning all of this? Well, first of all, because I like you to be fully appraised of what's going on in my bonds before I invite you to ring in with the contents of yours. And second of all, because the producer said something very interesting just before we came on air. We spend our morning... we spend a bit of our morning talking about what we are likely to do later on the programme, running through the news, working out the difference between something that is going to be a headline and something that is going to be the basis for an interesting conversation. They are not the same thing. If I ever did a lecture in radio phone-in presenting, that would be, I think, point one. There is a huge difference between what is a big and important story and what is a big and interesting topic. You probably don't need me to describe to you the difference, but there is some stuff you just can't really have interesting conversations about. You can have conversations, but they won't necessarily be interesting. So we spend a little bit of time every morning working out what will be interesting, what will not, what I find personally engaging and why. And the producer this morning responded to one of our suggestions by saying, well, it's a bit GCSE debating society, to which I had two immediate responses. The first was, God, I'm old. It's O-level debating society for my generation. And the second was, I really liked GCSE debates. I really, really liked sixth form debates. I was, as I've no doubt have boasted before, a national champion at schoolboy debating. And I wasn't much cop at anything else in those days, so it meant an awful lot to me. And she's right. The assisted dying would very much fit into that category. It didn't at the time that I was doing teenage debating societies. The big ones would be probably the death penalty and abortion. But I think assisted dying has moved into a similar space, possibly pushed out abortion slightly, because despite recent developments in America, that seems a lot closer to consensus than it was when I was growing up. And in the interest of being completely open and honest about mind changing, because I think that this might have some relevance to where I stand on assisted dying, I used to passionately debate in favour of criminalising abortion. I remember taught exclusively from the age of 3 by nuns and monks. There were teachers they were lay teachers in my schools, but I from 3 to 7 and then from 13 to 18, I was in a convent and then a monastery. It's quite an odd upbringing, really, when you think about it. And in that kind of Catholic environment in the 1970s and the 1980s, resisting the legalization of abortion, rejecting the legalization of abortion was a huge, huge issue. From the pulpit to the classroom, it would be rammed down our throats that this was something we needed to resist, and the reasons for resisting it were obviously largely religious, as in the sanctity of human life, what God has created, man cannot terminate, and the biology about the point at which life begins, human life begins. We're not doing this today. Don't waste tuppence ringing in, but the reason I mention it is because I would argue passionately against abortion. And I thought that my zinger argument was this. As an adopted person, I would say, I was adopted as a baby, as a 28-day-old baby. And I would say, I sort of lean back quite pompously, I imagine, at this point on the desk behind me. And I'd say, if abortion had been legal in 1970s Ireland, I would not be standing here before you today. And I'd done this debate probably 3 or 4 times, because it really was a hardy perennial of the sixth form debating circuit. We used to go to other schools and do it and things like that. And I'd done it 3 or 4 times before I realised that perhaps a world without me in it would not strike the audience, or indeed my opponents, or possibly some of my friends, as quite the tragedy that it seemed to be to me. A world. I realised that was pretty much the extent of my argument. You are calling for a world in which I would not exist. Are you mad? And as I say, it became pretty clear that that was not necessarily a terror, a fear shared by everybody else. But it is a subject upon which I have changed my mind quite violently over the years. And that's why I mention it in the relevance or in the context of 2 dames, Diana Rigg, the actress, and Dame Esther Rantzen, who has made a life, really, dedicated her career to promoting important causes and helping people. The former, Diana Rigg, made an impassioned case to legalise assisted dying in a message recorded shortly before her truly awful and dehumanising death from cancer 3 years ago. Those are her words. That was published in The Observer last weekend. And Dame Esther Rantzen has revealed overnight, really, I think, that she has signed up with Dignitas, the assisted dying clinic in Switzerland, after being diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. I've lost 2 of my best friends in the last 3 years, almost to the day. One 10 days ago, one 3 years ago, almost to the day. One was just snatched away without any expectation or warning, and the other had a very long and horrible drawn-out death, which did, as Diana Rigg's story contains, did also involve a sort of collapse of everything, up to and including complete incontinence. And we never had that conversation about assisted dying because it was just not on the agenda. But you imagine yourself in some of these situations, or other people, and you just wonder. So why have I changed my mind? 2 reasons. The first is, I think, religion. My Catholicism, my Christianity ebbs and flows throughout my life, but it never quite flows fast enough anymore for me to believe that I have the right, or anybody really has the right, to tell you as a woman what to do with your own body, or you perhaps as a human what you can do with your own body. And then when I used to do those debate shows on Sunday mornings, you've seen them. So Nicky Campbell was the absolute master of presenting them. But I'm sure that whoever does it these days does a cracking job as well. I used to do those debate shows, and you'd meet really interesting people. That you'd meet people who had deep and profound personal experience of issues that you had previously fallen into the trap of seeing as debating topics, which is, in a sense, what the producer was alluding to this morning. Because, of course, it's much more than a debating topic. It is life and death for real people, some of whom will be listening to this program. And I had, you won't be surprised to learn, I had been shooting my mouth off on the radio, be going back about 15 years now, or possibly a little more, shooting my mouth off on the radio, thumping the sort of lapsed Catholic drum, giving it the whole, well, you can't, it's take away human, it's this, that, and the other, and all of that. And a young woman in a wheelchair who was a passionate campaigner for assisted dying sort of spotted me across the green room and steered in my direction and just spoke to me very calmly and very compassionately about why she deserved to be able to decide when she couldn't take it anymore. And that is, I think, where this subject opens itself up for us this morning, because on the one hand, yeah, it is an undergraduate debating topic. It is a classic phone-in perennial. But on the other, it is about telling somebody who can't bear their existence anymore that they have to. And I don't really see how you can do that anymore. I don't know whether it's because the stranglehold of formal traditional religion upon this country is currently very loose. It may well tighten again. If we've learned anything in the last few years, it's that no progress is permanent. There's always a possibility of some orange-faced buffoon coming along and smashing the reverse gear. So there's that possibility. So it could be because religion has loosened its stranglehold on much of the population. Or it could be the fact that probably now, and I'm only in my early 50s, but probably now most of us, most adults, have got some experience of watching someone die very slowly and very painfully. And I don't really understand why the society in which we live still has a problem with addressing that. And I think that is the question that I want to ask. So I'm always more interested on days like this in minds that have changed or are changing. I don't oddly think today is a day where I'm going to insist on personal experience, because what intrigues me most intellectually and emotionally is the question of why society still resists this. Esther Ranson calling for a free vote in Parliament, because last time there was a vote, I think to the surprise of many observers and commentators, it went the other way. Parliament didn't vote to legalise assisted dying or decriminalise assisted dying. I'm always a little confused by the technicalities of it. Why does society resist? So I want you to draw on philosophy. I want you to draw on history. I want you to draw on sociology. I want you to draw on religion. And of course, I want you to draw on personal experience. But the question I really want to answer is not whether or not you think it should happen, because that, I think, is a relatively futile exercise. It's a bit he said, she said. But working on the premise that forcing somebody to die a long, miserable and agonizing death when they don't want to is patently barbaric. Why? And I can ask this question, I can use that language, because I used to be, until quite recently, on the wrong side of this argument. But why do you think our society is so resistant to the idea that that is wrong? 0345 6060 973. I'm going to use that language. Forcing somebody to die a slow and agonizing death when they don't want to is patently barbaric, I think. So why does our society, at this point in its history, in 2023, in the 21st century, with religion very much in retreat, why does our society still resist this, to me, increasingly simple conclusion so vigorously? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And just to put a smile on your face, Ash has been in touch, referring back to that comment about my conviction at a young and callow age that the prospect of a world without me in it would terrify all of the audience at my debates as much as it terrified me. Ash reminds us, he says, "You are dangerously close to Tim Minchin's the final words that Tim Minchin intends to speak, which will be, who will the world revolve around now?"
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
So why does society still have such a problem with assisted dying? 0345 6060 973. The more you read into it, the more you read about it, the more you learn, the more you witness, the more you experience, I would suggest the clearer it becomes that this is a really backwards attitude, a really backwards approach. But, as I say every morning about this point on the programme, I could be wrong. Tell me why I am, or, actually more interestingly perhaps, tell me why you think our society is like this. Greg's in Leeds. Greg, what would you like to say?
Good morning. Yes, I feel very strongly that people should have the ability to make that decision for themselves. Like Esther Ranson has, she's got cancer, which is very aggressive, and she wants to take that decision to end her life without having to endure more pain. But as a society, we have to make sure that the checks and balances are there to make sure that it is somebody's own decision and not that they are sort of being coerced into making that decision, because they may be ill, they may be in a care home that is costing their family a lot of money, and they are ill. But if they could just be look, you're in your 90s, you've had your time. Those sort of things, we've got to make sure that society does not go down that road.
Yeah, that's a given, I think. Although I would have thought that every act of suicide could have been caused by coercion, or could have not caused by, because there's never a single cause, could have been encouraged by coercion or pressure from family and or friends, couldn't it? I mean, if we're going to open that door, it wouldn't just be people who were terminally ill that would come through it.
Well, I'm talking about people who are.
No, I know you are, but I'm saying that possibility applies to anybody.
But
it wouldn't just be someone very old. But we're talking with
yes.
assisted dying at the moment. We're talking about people who are terminally ill, because if they're not terminally ill, Greg. Now, hang on. It's important that we both understand this. If they're not ill, they don't need any assistance. That's always struck me as one of the great junctions in this conversation. It's only people who have lost the physical capability of dying when they want to die that would need assisted dying. So it is, I'm afraid, a conversation that's confined to terminally ill people.
Right. I must have got the wrong end of the stick there, I'm afraid, James.
That's all right. That's why you mentioned the cancer. You see, we mentioned the fact that Diana Rigg was
slippery slope,
doubly incontinent.
If somebody's life was just an inconvenience to their family now.
Yeah, but that would apply to everybody. That might apply to people in their 30s or their 40s. Yeah, it could be parents who don't want children. I mean, there's all manner of things. This is about people who are so ill. So I did say several times, a slow and agonising death is the alternative to the assisted dying. Frida's in Waterford. Frida, what would you like to say?
Hi. My mother, at 94, actually changed her mind. But when she was your age, she actually... No, this all happened in the Netherlands. So you know that our laws are different.
Yes.
She signed a declaration that if she became infirm, that she definitely did not want to live.
That's just a sort of DNR situation, is it? A do not resuscitate situation rather than an assisted dying situation?
No, she didn't want to be infirm.
Gosh.
But anyway, life went on. She lost. Her first husband died. Her second husband died. My sister died. My brother died.
I'm sorry.
So all she had was me living in Ireland, because I'm here since the 70s, because my late husband was Irish.
That's why you've got such a magnificent accent, Frida. I would say it was 52% Dutch and 48% Irish. This is a pre-Brexit. Well, no, you're in Ireland. This is an EU accent.
I hate the Dutch accent.
This is awkward.
Yeah, I hate it. I would prefer an Italian or a Spanish or a French accent. Yeah. I love Italian, but anyway, beside the point.
Yes,
but anyway,
it is.
Then eventually she was nearly blind.
Right.
She was at times incontinent.
Yes.
So every time I went over, and they said she couldn't be. She was in a home where you could still have independent living, but they said it's impossible. So she had to go to a nursing home.
Right.
And I had to, which she would not want, and which was very painful.
Yes.
I said, we just go to another room, and then the nurse told her, now, this is supposed to be your home.
Yes. Yes.
And she said, what? Oh, she was disgusted, she was angry, she was ever. So
okay.
I made sure that all her furniture and whatever she had and loved was in there, and plants and whatever. So eventually she wasn't too bad. But then she was 94, and she fell, and she broke her hip. Now, at 94, they are not going to put in a new hip.
No.
Not in the Netherlands anyway. And I was on the phone with the doctor, and he says, no, we don't do that at 94. We just give her pain medication. I said, so that's going to be morphine. Now, the trouble with morphine is that you have to give more and more because the body gets used to it, and eventually then you go past the level of it being safe.
Yes.
So eventually,
I'm just gonna push you, if I may, Frida, gently towards the to the moment of the mind changing.
Oh yeah. No, the moment of the mind was that while she was lying in that bed, as bad as she was, what did she say to the doctor? Keep me alive as long as you can.
Gosh, I don't. Yeah. I want to phrase this question very sensitively.
Yeah.
I may struggle, so can I apologise in advance if it comes out a bit crass? But how do we know it wasn't the morphine talking?
This was before she was.
Okay.
This was shortly after the fall.
Oh, good. So she just decided that clinging. No, I don't want to say clinging on, but she decided
cling on as long as possible.
Every moment was precious, regardless of what she'd thought when she was in her 50s. And did he? Did the doc? Did he or she?
In her 50s, she was 94 at this stage.
And
she begged to stay alive.
Gosh, that's incredible, isn't it? And if she had. Well, we don't know, do we? There's so many sort of what ifs, but that's always one of the factors that you think of is what if you change your mind halfway through? There is no turning back. What if you change your mind at the last minute? But why society is still so resistant to the idea, we have to put that on the list, the notion that people might sign up for something in their 50s and then sort of feel almost compelled to go along with it when they can no longer look after themselves. It's coming up to 10:29. There's always two people I think of when we have this conversation. I think it plays in a bit to what Frida just said to us. I don't know if you're familiar with Henry Fraser. He's an incredible young man. There's a whole play about him at the moment in the West End at that new theatre up near Tottenham Court Road. And Henry had a tragic accident, crushed his spinal cord, paralysed from the shoulders down, and determined to embrace his new existence. He does mouth painting. If you follow me on Twitter, you'd have seen some of his work. It is quite incredible. He jumped into the sea, and it wasn't deep enough. You can work out what happened yourself. And is now a phenomenal mouth artist. And as I say, the inspiration for a new West End play. He's a published author. Some of his books, The Power in You, the Little Big Things, which is the name of the play based on his life story, is incredible. And then another lad who was a rugby player, a similar age to Henry, a little older. He was 23, and played rugby for England as a teenager. 23 when he died. He went the other way and made his way to Switzerland to an assisted dying clinic. So they had very, very, very similar stories, and one went one way and one went the other. I don't know what that means, actually. I don't know what that proves. I'm not sure it proves anything. I just thought in the context of the conversation we're having, you would find the twin experiences of Daniel James and Henry Fraser as thought-provoking or as arresting as I do. 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:33 is the time. I think that Frida's Dutch heritage was interesting there because, you know, it's another Northern European Protestant country. I always have a little frisson of fear when I say things like that so glibly and so fluently. I'm pretty sure it is, but you're going to ring me up now and tell me that it isn't. And they have a completely different attitude to assisted dying or euthanasia, which I think, as Mark will explain to us shortly, is a different proposition. So why does the United Kingdom have such an issue, such a problem with this notion that I think, when you think about it calmly and clearly, in fact, Stephen in Rochester puts what I'm about to say better than I would. He says, I think in the cold light of day, most people with calm thought would agree with you, James. But the reality is that most people don't live their lives considering death openly until they have to. And when you have to, whether it's for yourself or your loved ones, you are, in my experience, pretty much caught short. You feel very isolated, time feels tight. And at that point, not many would feel like entering the debate with real gusto was a priority. There will obviously be exceptions. It's very well put, Stephen. Mark is in Groningen in the Netherlands. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Near enough. Groningen.
Groningen.
That's perfect.
Thank you. Carry on.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I know you don't want particular personal...
No, I do. God, don't make me sound like such a nasty piece of work. Of course I do. I also want the bigger question of why we have a national attitude to it that is, I think, a little illogical.
Okay. If I give you a little background,
please.
I am Dutch, but I actually grew up in England. I went to school in England.
Okay.
So I've sort of had experience of both.
Yes.
And I've been back in the Netherlands for the last 20 years. To give a little bit of context, on New Year's Day this year still, my husband of 20 years killed himself. He took his own life. He'd been suffering for a year with terrible depression, and although he was being treated, he couldn't take it anymore. So he walked out, and after police searches and so on, he was found 2 days later. Then, as this year has gone by, and it's, as you can imagine, it's been a nightmare.
Yes.
Somebody who actually the person who organised the funeral for my husband,
yes,
was also working with a young woman, 25 years old, who was waiting for euthanasia. It was very confrontational for me because she was very physically perfectly fit, but she had extreme mental problems.
Okay.
And what I heard about her, and I'll be very quick, what I heard about her was that once she got onto the euthanasia program,
yes,
her life changed dramatically, and she had the happiest year of her life. She stopped self-harming, she had a purpose, and the end of her life was a complete celebration. And she died
so the knowledge
3 months ago.
The knowledge that she would be helped out of this world was liberating for her.
Yeah, that's what's kept me going, to be honest, because
how do you mean?
Since my husband died, every day I've thought about killing myself. Every day. I'm in a desperately deep depression. And I think it's the fact that in this country, there's a system in place that if it gets too bad, I don't have to kill myself. There's a process. There are things that built in that you don't have this horrible emptiness where the only escape. I saw years ago. I saw a documentary by Terry Pratchett about assisted dying, and he followed a guy to Switzerland. And I remember thinking, why did he have to do that? My husband's ex-father-in-law, if you follow that, because from his previous, had euthanasia some years ago. He had cancer. He'd suffered for years. The last day of his life was just a party. It was. He chose it. He chose everything. He chose the music for his funeral. Everybody could visit him, and at the time that he wanted, he was able in his own home, beautiful house, in his own home with his wife next to him. He was able to die quietly. And to answer the question that you put, I know I've talked a lot now.
No, Mark, you're both informing, educating, and moving all of us. So you take as much time as you want.
I think I only heard half of what your previous Dutch person was talking about. I think it's more. We have a different attitude here. There are many people who are against euthanasia for religious grounds or whatever. We just have the attitude that you don't have to do it. No one's forcing you to. The way of it takes a hell of a lot to actually get euthanasia. I think that's possibly why my husband couldn't wait. If you see what I mean.
Of course I do.
But I know from so many people that the fact it's there often puts life into people, that they know, okay, I don't have to throw myself in front of a train or take all the pills and all the things that I've thought about doing every day for the last year. And that's it, really. I just think we're
I'd never thought of it. I'd never thought of it like that. What do you think it is about what's different? Is it? Do the Dutch talk about death more? Is it?
Yeah.
Because we've got quite a Victorian attitude to it, probably in this country.
I know. From when I lived there, I couldn't believe it when I was a teenager going to school in the great town of Reading.
Yes.
Also a Catholic school, I have to say. There are Catholics in the Netherlands. I live opposite the cathedral here.
But it's not a Catholic country, is it?
Not officially, no.
Were you at the Oratory?
No, place in those days it was called Presentation College.
Okay.
I think I know that the British don't talk about death. We do, not
endlessly.
Not endlessly, but it's not so much of a taboo.
No, here. I mean, there it is. And I wonder why that is. What is it? I mean, it's easy to throw away these glib lines like, we've got such a Victorian attitude. I mean, if you asked me to write 2,000 words on what that means, Mark, I'm afraid I would struggle. But taboo is a much better word. And if it's a taboo, you end up in strange places because you're not talking about things.
Yeah, and I know you get this thing on the British. I don't follow the British press anymore for all sorts of reasons, which you know, why probably. But there seems to be this thing, that here you've got a headache, you go to the doctor and he'll inject you. You'll get euthanasia and all of this, and that all doctors are simply waiting to. No, if you're a doctor and you disagree with euthanasia on moral reasons or religious reasons, then you don't do it. You simply... But there's none of this idea. My Dutch friends, this whole idea of dignitas, of it's just unbelievable. How barbaric is that?
That's fascinating. I was going to ask you that question because you've described something that sounds... I don't know if organic is quite the right word, but it sounds a lot more... whatever word is better than organic at this point in what I'm saying than this. But I guess for a British person, there's no choice. That's the only option open to them at the moment. Mark, thank you.
Just say one thing.
Of course you can.
Don't take this the wrong way. I didn't really listen much to LBC. It was when my husband was sick, and I used to have to spend, hours in the bedroom, really, to give him freedom. I started listening to LBC. You and probably Sheila Fogarty, and surprisingly, Nick Ferrari as well, have kept me going. You really have. And if you, I'm sure you already realise the power that you and your colleagues have. But I just want to thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mark, and take care.
Thanks. And have a happy New Year.
Well, you have a happy New Year as well.
I'll try.
I hesitate.
It's not going to be the best.
Of course it's not, but it will get better. It will get better. It has to. You take care of yourself, Mark. Thank you so much. And anyone affected by any of the issues that Mark has alluded to there, should know that Samaritans are available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So right through the Christmas period as well, there will be someone on the other end of the phone if and when you dial 116 123. A lot of love for you, Mark, mate. Take care. 10:42 is the time. Pavel is in Ashford. Pavel, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Yes, please be patient with me.
Of course.
It's kind of very emotional topic, and thanks for actually bringing it up and talking about it. I'm from Poland, so ending your life as a Catholic is something really no.
Is it? So a bit like we
yeah.
were 30 years ago, probably. Not a Catholic country, but very much approaching issues like this and indeed abortion from a very, very religious perspective.
Absolutely. I kind of left Poland in 2006, came to UK under the impression that the country is, free. You can do what you want. You can be whoever you want. I'm gay. So for me, it was kind of like starting a new life.
Yes.
And then you can make whatever decision you want and nobody will be judging you. And, like life story, I met the guy and fell in love. And shortly after, turns out that he had MSA, multi-system atrophy.
Right.
And we've been with this disease for 17 years, and last 3 years, he's lost all the abilities to live independently.
Yes.
He's got a deep brain stimulator. He's got stomach bag, so he can't go to the toilet. He's got catheter. He's got absolutely everything wrong with his body you could have. He can't speak, he can't swallow, he can't eat, he's got a peg to be fed. And I'm the one who actually has him.
Hey. He's got you, hasn't he? He's got you, Pavel.
He does, but...
Take your time. Take your time. There's no rush. Take your time. Breathe. And also we can stop. We don't have to do this.
Sure.
It's entirely up to you.
It's very important because he wanted to end it all.
Yes. And he can't.
He can't.
And that's brutal.
I don't want him to.
Oh, Pavel, of course you don't.
But it's getting harder and harder, and it's extremely difficult to see a person you've been loving for 17 years.
And yet, still every second you have with him to you is precious, I think.
And the person is dying, and every single day it's getting worse and worse, and slowly you're losing the person. It's kind of like being trapped in your own mind and not able to do absolutely nothing for yourself. When he could, we spoke about this possibility, and he wanted to be able to make this decision.
Yes.
And unfair situation is that he can't.
And that's not fair, even though you would rather he didn't.
Absolutely.
It's not fair that he can't. It's so clear to me, Pavel, that it's not fair. It didn't used to be. I think perhaps you've been on a similar journey to me because of our upbringings and our Catholicism and the priests, always the priests. But it's just not fair, is it?
It's not. I thought that will be easier in UK. I thought UK is a very progressive place to be. And in a way it is, because it allows us to be married, allows us to be happy, allows us to live the life we want.
Yes.
But does not allow you to make the most important decision, which is,
gosh, yes, of course.
Do I want to end it all?
And when I can't do it myself, should I be able to get help? Really?
Absolutely. If somebody could, because I don't think people understand what the wish of the person really is and what the wish is based on.
No.
So if somebody could actually come and live with us for a week, just observing.
Just to see.
Maybe then the people will understand a little bit more about the daily struggle, and that this decision should be a right of the person to be able to make at the time the person really wants to do it. I understand that they should be safeguards in place.
Yes, of course, we all do.
That decision should be made based on some sort of medical evidence. But For my husband, there's no hope. There is no medication he can take. All medication was withdrawn, and nobody can do absolutely nothing for him no more.
And as you say, if people could see that, they would see the clarity of the position that you hold. To be honest, Pavel, and I think this may be part of the reason why you rang in today, hearing you tell that story will have had the same effect on many people listening. You can't really push back against what you've said with any of the rhetorical devices or arguments that are routinely used in these sort of conversations or for want of a better word, debates.
Oh, absolutely. The most annoying thing is that, people keep saying to you, oh, God give you life, so the God is the one who should decide when you go.
Yeah.
But God also give you this, pain and suffering. And people in our faith, they say, oh, yeah, it's a gift from God. The suffering is a gift.
Yeah.
You should just bite your teeth and, go through life suffering. Because This is the gift from God.
He also gave us free will, I suppose, if you're going to go down the road of faith, didn't he? So, I mean, but that's a sledgehammer. That's such a brutal argument. And I think, I often find with religious people, or quite ostentatiously religious people, they're nowhere near as compassionate as they like to think themselves to be, because they're just compounding. That's cruel, I think. It's a cruel thing to say to you and to your husband. Daily living with the thought at the back of your head is that if you do something towards helping somebody to end the life, that you will burn in hell, which was imprinted in your head since you were born, is just unfair. Yes. Well, I'm not going to argue with you. You know that. I mean, there's lots of things that we were told would have us burning in hell, Pavel, and I'm pretty sure we've both done plenty of those over the years as well. But not that. That's not right. Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Are you finding time to look after yourself? I mean, it sounds like an unrelenting program of care that you have, but you do find moments to take care of yourself, I hope.
I do have a 3 hours break every day, so
okay.
I do have a moment when I can, for example, give you a call and
good.
And share. And thank you for listening. This is kind of a great help to be able to express.
Good.
That the decision should be the decision of the person who actually suffering, nobody else's.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, but I don't know that anyone would be able to put it better than you have, or indeed from a more powerful perspective. Pavel, you take care. I hope you manage to have some kind of Merry Christmas. I really do.
And likewise to all the listeners of LBC as well.
God bless.
Thank you.
It's 10 to 11.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:54 is the time. Pavel and Mark coming in for an awful lot of love. I wish there was something I could do to bottle it up, lads, and send it to you. Hugh, I will read in full. It's very apposite that this subject's up for discussion, as I find myself right in the middle of these difficult conversations. My beloved wife of 39 years is in the latter stages of motor neurone disease, and I'm caring for her 24/7. She is peg-fed and constantly in discomfort on several fronts, most critically breathing. As her body closes down, she is talking about ceasing the peg feed with the support of the local hospice, but there are so many issues to consider. Pavel says it well. You want the person you love to be here as long as possible, and yet you want their agony to end. And there is a little bit of me that wants my burden to end. Pavel is going through exactly what we are going through. This is a line that will stay with you, I promise. Thank you, Hugh. It will stay with me. Despite all this horror, I deem it a privilege to be able to support this amazing woman in her last months. Gosh, 10:55 is the time. Paul is in Newcastle. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I am a doctor working in intensive care, so death and dying is my bread and butter. I see it every day.
Yes.
I would say I think we are legally a long way behind where we are emotionally on this front, and I think it harks back to suicide being illegal
up
to sometime in the mid-60s. and beyond that time as well, death remaining a very taboo subject.
More Edwardian than Victorian, I've been told, Paul. But I did admit when I said that it was a Victorian throwback that I didn't really know what I was talking about.
It's we struggle to talk about death.
Yes.
Outside the cold light of day, as I think another of your listeners put it, in the heat of someone actively dying or becoming progressively more unwell, where death is a real threat. We do not talk about death. We talk about passing away,
yes.
Not being with us. And I see this in language used by families, relatives, and doctors and healthcare professionals as well. It is across the board that it is a taboo subject, and we dare not face it in the eye for multiple reasons. One being not wanting to upset the party opposite on the other side of the conversation. We don't want to antagonize emotions and all the backdrop that people have about death, their own thoughts and feelings.
Yes.
But actually, I think it needs to be accepted as a norm. And when this subject is no longer a controversial subject and doesn't warrant being on the primetime radio talk, only then will we have reached a place which I think
right.
Which I think is acceptable. So the way I see it, existence is completely optional based on everyone's kind of situational setup. So, and I say that, I don't mean to be callous at all. I really don't.
You don't
but
sound callous.
Right now, an able-bodied person, I can go and jump off a cliff if I choose to. Yes, there are consequences to that action, but I can do it, and it's not illegal, and it's my personal choice.
Yeah.
I think it's particularly cruel that we take away that opportunity from people who are unable to do that for themselves, who have the highest burden of health and disease and suffering. I think it's particularly cruel that option is taken away because we don't want to have someone else culpable or involved in this assisted dying process. And I think places like Dignitas and other more progressive countries in the EU have definitely gone in the right direction.
Well, do you know, I think one thing I'm taking away from today is the fact that the Netherlands is, I think progressive is probably the right word, is actually considerably more progressive than Dignitas and Switzerland. The way that Mark described his friend's friend, actually, or his father, I think it was his ex-father-in-law's friend, who didn't change their mind about wanting to die, but enjoyed the final year of their life
absolutely,
because they knew it was going to happen and happen in a fairly natural and straightforward way, rather than having to schlep halfway across Europe from here to Switzerland. What is it? I think you've absolutely nailed something crucial with the recent the sense memory or the muscle memory of suicide being illegal, which plays right into Pavel's memories of priests and people telling him that you'd burn in hell if you took your own life. I think Mother Teresa of Calcutta was a big one for claiming that suffering was somehow a tribute to God or so. So there's a mixture of religion and history and geography there. But Netherlands isn't Alpha Centauri, is it? It's not Mars.
No,
what is it about here?
Not.
What is it about the UK that makes us a little bit, let's just say, slow on the uptake?
I think British conservatism is still rife. Don't look at the political parties for it. Look at how we interact at a societal level. We are a very sort of conservative nation. We don't like to. I mean, even the idea about talking about your salary with someone you didn't know particularly well, that's off the. But do you know what I mean?
I know. I just had that yesterday with Chris Moyles, actually, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
But that is the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
I grew up in Italy. I've come from, and I've got a Mediterranean background.
Right.
And I come to the UK. My wife gives me such a hard time every day. She says I haven't got a filter. She's British, by the way.
Right.
But actually, I do have a filter. It's just different to the British filter. I say and think what I feel day, night. It doesn't matter to me. I don't care about the consequences. Whereas that does not fly in her family.
I'm not picking a side in your domestics, Paul. It may be that there's a balance to be struck here between your wife's reticence and your ebullience. But it is an English. And to a slightly lesser extent, perhaps, it is a British condition. You're right, that reticence that I don't want to really talk about. And of course, what we've done historically, and you'll probably be a better spotter of this than those of us who've grown up here would be, is that we sell it to each other as a strength. We sell it to each other as stiff upper lip or as resilience or whatever it may be. And of course, when we have conversations like the one we've had today, you realise that being able to talk about your feelings does make things better. It may not fix things, but it certainly won't make them worse. And I think we can all agree that the people who've been brave, if that's the right word, enough to talk about their most intimate feelings today have given us all some inspiration and hopefully, and by their own account, help themselves as well. Paul, thank you. It's 11:01.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11. A special thought, I think, after that last hour for carers, people caring for others, especially those who are doing it in very lonely circumstances where both their caring life and their personal life are the same life, in the same building with the same people. I can see why, perhaps, radio keeps you company in ways that other things and other mediums cannot. And we're all, I can promise you, very conscious of that responsibility. I'm also conscious of my responsibility when we turn our attention to the next subject, but it is one that I find... I don't even know what the word is. I don't know. You've heard me. Right, here's the thing. For the last 10 weeks, you have heard me walking a tightrope several times a week when it comes to discussing the unfolding situation in Israel and Gaza. And I am, forgive me for a moment of self-congratulation, but I am pretty confident that I have stayed on that tightrope at all times. I don't think I've fallen off it in either direction, however convinced you may have been that I was being biased or unbalanced or unfair. I answer to my conscience on these subjects, and I am confident, actually, that and I didn't in the past. I'm absolutely clear about that. I got it wrong in the past in all sorts of different ways. But on this tragedy, this tragic unfolding catastrophe, massacre, the terrorist atrocity followed by what I still see as very close to, if not all the way towards, a form of ethnic cleansing. It is just horrible, absolutely horrible, and I'm confident I've walked that tightrope correctly. I never walk this one, I never get this right, but I answer to my own conscience, and therefore I don't think I've ever fallen off the tightrope. Transgender guidance in schools has been released by a government that has made much of, I think, demonising transgenderism. Now, you might think it deserves to be demonised. You might reject the word demonised, because how can you demonise something that's nonsensical or something that's wrong, you might think. But I don't. Can I tell you something funny that you will think is just an excuse to plug my new book, but is actually really quite remarkable, I think, as an illustration of how bonkers this conversation has become in some quarters. And I'm not convinced. I think was it 30p Lee who said that transgender and culture wars were going to be what they fought the next election on, or was it one of the other ones, Gullis or Brendan Clark-Smith, or I don't know. I think it was 30p Lee, and I don't know how big these issues are that the Conservative Party is betting the house on. I really don't. We recorded a lovely programme yesterday. Myself, Sheila Fogarty and Ian Dale recorded a little look back at some of the stories of this year and a look forward at what is likely to happen next year. I think you'll be able to hear it on Boxing Day. And I think we're all unclear on whether or not the issues that the government is betting everything on at the moment are actually as prominent in the minds of the public as they are in the minds of the government. And small boats and latterly transgenderism seem to be subjects which they are determined to turn into so-called culture wars. So you approach the news that the government has laid down comprehensive guidance. You approach it with a modicum of caution, because this is a government that has been prepared to weaponise the issue in pursuit, I would argue, of quite cheap votes. Indeed, speaking of cheap votes, up pops Kemi Badenoch, the Minister for Women and... It says here equalities. Good Lord. She says it's an issue that has been hijacked by activists misrepresenting the law, which in a normal country you'd be required to prove immediately. But anyway, the thing that highlights how bonkers this is for me is that the Guardian newspaper has published 2 pieces about my new book, How They Broke Britain. The first of which was an interview with me in which the interviewer expressed in print unhappiness that my attitude to the transgender issue was not pro-transgender enough. And then they published a review of the book in which the reviewer expressed, and I think I read it correctly, the view that my attitude to transgenderism was not sceptical enough or as supportive of women's rights as it should be. And I can't think of any other context in which I'd be accused of not supporting women's rights, except the context in which you might be accusing me of not being sufficiently critical of transgender, I don't know if I can say ism, perhaps transgender activism, transgenderism, I don't know. But that's the same newspaper, 2 articles, both about a book that doesn't touch upon transgenderism at all. I think there might be one mention of it solely in the context of it being one of the culture war weapons that weapons like 30p Lee are determined to fight the next election on. And the same newspaper writing about the same book takes the same author to task from opposite ends of the spectrum for the same attitude to the same subject. That is absolutely crackers, isn't it? But that's where we are. And it's why I'm conscious of the difference in scale, both moral and actual, of the two subjects, but I do, oddly, approach this subject with a similar sense of trepidation to the one that I feel when I approach conversations about Israel and Gaza or the West Bank. It is a consciousness that I can't really say anything without upsetting somebody, which is why I can only really answer to my own conscience. And do you know, I wasn't 100% sure that I was going to talk about this until we talked to Pavel in the last hour. And Pavel's reminder of what remains a fairly commonplace position for a fairly significant number of people, many of whom might be parents. Pavel being told by, I don't know whether it was members of his congregation or just members of his circle, that if his husband were to take his own life, he would burn in hell for all eternity. And that's why the most interesting element for me, perhaps, of what the Department for Education has published today is the insistence that parents will have more involvement in decisions affecting their children. I don't want to fall out with you today, but I don't know how I can say what I want to say without possibly upsetting you, if you're in the category that I am about to describe. If your child feels that they can't talk to you about something as significant as their gender, if they believe that they have been born into the wrong body, something which, for the record, I consider to be a real thing, if your child feels that they can't talk to you about that, I think it might be your fault. I don't know whether that's fair, and I don't know whether it's sort of smug parenting, but the idea that the child feels they can talk to someone at school about questioning their gender, but they can't talk to someone at home, is possibly linked to what Pavel was reminding of us of with regard to people who think that if you take your own life, or indeed if you're gay, you're going to burn in hell for all eternity. So, what should the school do in those circumstances? I'm looking at the guidance, I'm looking at the press release, I'm reading that schools and colleges should be involved in decisions. Schools and colleges have been told that parents should be involved in decisions affecting their children. And so I find myself wondering about the circumstances in which a child doesn't want their parents to be involved in these decisions, in these issues, and whether or not the school has a responsibility to the child or to the parent. I think it's a really invidious position for a school to be put in, but that, of course, doesn't mean that it is the wrong thing to do. My instincts are that if a child doesn't want to tell his parents or her parents about something like this, then the school should not tell them. Those are my instincts. I'm trying to imagine it involving one of my own children, and I would feel let down by the school. I would feel betrayed, I think, by my child. But most of all, I think I'd feel ashamed that they felt they couldn't tell me. And in a possibly vain attempt to avoid largely pointless conversations about the finer points of transgender legislation, I want you to tell me whether that's fair. Is it fair to suggest that parents whose children don't want to talk to them about the fact that they are questioning their gender have done something wrong? Well, let's get this language bang on. Because if it was me, I think I would feel ashamed. Is that fair? 0345 6060 973. And then, of course, we are taken into a conversation about whether or not schools should be passing on private information to parents that the children would rather they did not. There's also some weird stuff, again from Kemi Badenoch, who's clearly using it as a weapon rather than as an attempt to help troubled people and troubled families. It makes clear that schools do not have to accept a child's request to socially transition and that teachers or pupils should not be pressured into using different pronouns. We're also clear how vital it is that parents are informed and involved in the decisions that impact their children's lives. I can't help wondering what kind of mum would have a child who didn't want them to know about something as personal and as profound as this. Is it fair to suggest that those parents might have done something wrong? That's a question, all right? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 17 minutes after 11. But I'm thinking about all of the other issues, some of which Pavel has reminded us of, where parents might have expressed opinions or views which make a child terrified of telling their parents the truth about what they are going through. And to have Kemi Badenoch stating that parents must be informed and involved sounds to me a little frightening. But do you know, as with Israel and Gaza questions, I put forward a carefully considered opinion, and I do welcome the possibility that I'm wrong. Maybe there's nothing to be ashamed of at all if your child doesn't want you to know about something deeply personal and profoundly important. It's 11:17.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 11 is the time. Adam in Rossendale already helping me improve on this subject. As a parent of trans kids myself, I can say that it's more your problem than your fault. It's something that you, as a parent, have to own and deal with. The child has quite enough to deal with, and they deserve your 100% support. The point I'm trying to make, which I think Adam understands, is that if your child feels they can't rely on your 100% support and they don't even want you to know that they are questioning their gender, then should the school, if they found the courage to come forward at school and talk about it and tell people, should the school then be informing the parents? I suppose if I had to boil it down, I'm wondering whether a child that doesn't want their parents to know something probably has a very good reason for that. And I turn next to my friend Emma, who keeps me on keeps me very well informed and on the right path when it comes to these issues. Beginning with I think a fairly reliable comment that 98% of people don't care either way about us as a community. It's a benevolent indifference, thank goodness. It has, of course, been turned into or at least people try to turn it into a hot potato, and they continue. Schools should refer to counselling, and it should all be handled through CAMS, but you know the problem there. Resources, there is no CAMS. The line that I almost didn't read out because it possibly constitutes the end of the conversation. Outing gender variant or curious kids will lead to murders and suicides. I can't put it any more plainly than that. Kemi Badenoch says, we are also clear how vital it is that parents are informed and involved in the decisions that impact their children's lives. Vital that parents are informed. And Emma, who has lived this story and been one of my most reliable and illuminating correspondents over more years than either of us would care to remember, they write, outing gender variant or curious kids will lead to murders and suicides. I can't put it any more plainly than that. For me, that's the argument. Kemi Badenoch, on one hand, parents must be told. Someone who's lived this, on the other hand, saying if they are, it will lead to murders and suicides. And that's why I described it as a tightrope a moment ago. Zoe is in Tewkesbury in Worcestershire. Zoe, what would you like to say?
Hello there.
Hello.
I work in safeguarding in schools, and one of the big things that we're seeing at the moment is that schools should be, in my opinion, a place for children to be able to express themselves and to work out who they are in sort of a no-threat environment where they can change their minds, or they can maybe play with their identity, and for that to be a safe place for that to happen. And then through counselling in schools and encouragement, absolutely be given the opportunity to be encouraged that they should be honest with every member of their family as well. But I think to jump straight in with parents can feel awfully threatening, and it doesn't give that opportunity for play.
But what about... I hear you, and it's not a wonderful phone line, unfortunately, Zoe, so I'm not sure how long I'll detain you for. But but the idea that that when a child doesn't want their parent or parents plural to know, then they've probably got a good reason for that.
Absolutely. We've seen that, absolutely. Right. All sorts of reasons, quite a lot of religious reasons as well.
Yes.
And to inform the parents and then almost have it not heard can be way more traumatic for those young people than just allowing them to express in a school place. And if we can have nicknames for children who aren't trans, and that's acceptable, I don't understand why someone who, specifically because they are trans, aren't given the freedom to be able to use the pronouns that are most appropriate to them and any names that they feel are more appropriate.
It is a little odd how some people get so exercised about pronouns. Some of the issues attached to trans issues, some of the conversations and problems attached to trans issues, I think it's easy for everybody to understand if they put in the effort, but obsessing or having a profound problem with somebody else's pronouns, as you say, is a strange one, given how we approach nomenclature and nicknames and labels and tags in other areas of our life.
Absolutely. My eldest is trans as well.
Say again?
My eldest is trans as well. Well, they're non-binary. And that's been a huge adventure to understand who they are. But I think if you're in a household where you're being affirmed, it can be embracing and it can be empowering. But for children that don't have that, or for parents that just don't understand, I think it really is a time where we need to be supporting parents in understanding, but also accept the fact that if we have a situation of willful ignorance, that we do need to support the children separately.
Or worse. I mean, I don't know that the guidance lays this out. I should probably double check. But what happens if you don't? What happens if someone like Zoe or the head teacher in a school where she works doesn't tell the parents that a young person is questioning their gender, possibly even seeking to socially transition, and the parents then find out, and the guidance from Kemi Badenoch is that shouldn't have happened? Do they get prosecuted, persecuted? What the hell happens? How do How do you enforce something like this? It's quite bizarre, isn't it? Just to balance out Zoe's contribution, this is from Emma, who's in Edinburgh. James, your levels of ignorance around women's and children's rights and safety and trans issues is breathtaking. You smug and ill-informed. For God's sake, man, do the reading, do the research, and then come back to your radio mic and talk honestly. Thank you for that. It's 11:26. Nancy's in Wellington. Nancy, what would you like to say?
My position is that, having been a teacher for 32 years and worked very closely with the union, I was a union rep, that there are very, very strict procedures if a child makes a disclosure to you as a classroom teacher.
Yes.
And really, this should be considered, it is a disclosure, just like if a child discloses abuse or anything like that. And the classroom teacher should follow very strict protocols. And that involves taking it above you. You should never keep it to yourself. You should always report it to the child protection officer within your school, who will then deal with it in a legal and informed way. The classroom teacher doesn't necessarily have all the information.
No.
And so I believe very strongly that this should be classed as a disclosure and the proper protocols should be followed. And that is not straight away informing the parents, because the classroom teacher doesn't know the background necessarily of the family.
No, let me read you what it says. So the draft guidance clarifies that schools and colleges do not have to and should not accept all requests for social transition. Where a school considers a request, they should take a very cautious approach. And here's the bit that I think is pertinent to what you're saying, including watchful waiting periods and ensuring parents are fully consulted before any decision is taken.
And that's the difference, not informed, consulted. So I don't think that they should be informed as a matter of course.
But they can't be consulted without being informed, can they?
No, true. But what I mean is you have to go to the parents with a full knowledge of the situation.
Yes.
And because otherwise you might be making it 100 times worse for that child.
And that is the fear, isn't it? And it doesn't seem to be a fear that is going to be assuaged by anything that Kemi Badenoch or Gillian Keegan have said today.
But for many children with difficulties, that teacher that they've gone to is the most stable person in their life. And that's something that teachers need to remember as well. But if that child has come to you, it's because they trust you beyond any other adult. Let me imagine a parent, if I can, who is by most social measures a really good parent, a really engaged parent, a really understanding parent, but on this particular subject, they have perhaps been to the same school as Kemi Badenoch, and therefore they are unlikely to greet their child's revelation in the way that you and the child would welcome. Can we justify that parent being kept in the dark about what their own child is going through? No, I don't think they should be kept in the dark, but I think they should be informed through the proper procedures. So instead of just, it's such a strict protocol with disclosures, and you have to pass it on anyway by law.
Right.
The classroom teacher has to pass it on. You can never deal with it yourself. If you do, you're going to get in really big trouble.
Yeah.
Those people further up the line, the child protection officer in the school and whoever's involved with that side of things, child protection and safeguarding, it is a safeguarding issue, because you've got to make sure that child is safe by negotiating with the parents and sitting down together and explaining things in a way that takes the heat off the child.
Yeah. Are we discussing, because discussing the difference between consulting and disclosing is very nuanced. And I've slightly misunderstood what you said. I'm sure it's my fault, but the idea that the parents should not be kept in the dark, but we began by talking about this in the context of full disclosure in other areas. where the parent would be kept in the dark. I mean, I can't...
No, a parent is never kept in the dark.
Even with allegations of abuse?
Absolutely. They're not kept in the dark. It goes from, this happened to me on many occasions. A child makes a disclosure to you of whatever nature, and then that goes up, and it goes to the child safeguarding officer, etc., and then they make the decisions about how best to approach social services, the parents, etc. And they are highly trained in that role. I think you were speaking to somebody in Edinburgh, was it, who was a safeguarding officer? These are people who have experience, they've been trained, and they know how best to take that issue to the parents.
And are we confident that all schools have that in place?
Do I have to answer that?
Well, you have, actually. So there's problem number one. And problem number two, stop giggling, you'll set me off. Problem number two, if I've understood you correctly, is that the system was actually doing all right as it was. The problems would be caused by resources and shortages rather than by policy and prescription.
Absolutely.
So why have they changed it? Answer, perhaps because they believe that that parents can then subject their children to conversion therapy, writes No Hostages, because they believe transgenderism is caused by gender ideology and cultural Marxism. I've read that out without mentioning the politicians who you've put into that category, because I haven't really got the facts at my fingertips to know whether that's entirely fair or not. But I do know this. Kemi Badenoch thinks it is vital that parents are informed of things that their children do not want them to be informed about. And I don't know, I think I do know how I feel about that, but I am deferring to people much more immersed in the issues and the subject matter, and indeed the reality of what this is like on the ground. Thank you, Nancy. You've made me very late for the news. It's 11:33 and Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:36 is the time. I'm always, in some sense, interested in unnecessary offence. I am, as you know, possibly a little bit too enthusiastic in the field of necessary offence. When I think it is necessary to be offensive, I accept that invitation with great relish. But just using the word transgenderism is upsetting to people. I think I understand why, so I'll do my best not to. I'll just say trans issues. Please feel free to haul me up if I slip back, but try to be nice about it. The question we're asking really is about the simple notion of a child telling a teacher something they don't want their parents to know, and the teacher apparently then now being compelled to tell the parent what that is. And I don't think I'm misreading it or misinterpreting it, but I have got a fairly clear and I hope well explained problem with that idea. Hi James, I think you're being grossly unfair. Sometimes it's easier to broach a difficult subject with someone who is not as emotionally involved. The child should then be helped to bring the family into the conversation in their own time. I think that degendering situations wherever possible, writes Alan, would help to make this a smaller issue. Apart from sports and changing rooms, everyone could be a they. I understand what you're saying, and I'd just take away the grossly. I think that the last caller, I don't know whether you sent that text before Nancy rang in or after, but helping us understand the difference between disclose and consult is absolutely crucial. So the safeguarding experts take a view on when or indeed whether the parent should be brought into a conversation that has, as Alan says, started because it's easier to broach a difficult subject with someone who is not as emotionally involved. But if the child retains, Alan, the desire that mum and or dad are not told, what then, mate? That's the problem. So I think I'm going to reject that criticism. I don't think I am being grossly unfair. It is 11:38. Frank's in Reading. Frank, what would you like to say?
Hi. Well, I was calling. My wife and I are both teachers, both secondary teachers.
Yeah.
And we've got young children. I agree with you that if my children came to me, if they didn't come to me, we would feel shame, feeling that they weren't able to come to us.
Yes.
And there are certainly some people who don't deserve to be parents.
Crikey.
Who I mean, we've seen in schools, and luckily not yet with trans students' parents.
Yes.
But yeah, we have students who are trans, and we have students who are waiting for foster care because the home that they're living in is not suitable for them. And with legislation like this, the mixing between those two things can be catastrophic.
Tell me more, if that's not a lazy way of asking the question. What do you mean more precisely, if I can ask?
We have some parents who are abusive.
Yeah.
And yeah, students are waiting for this foster care to come through, but still living at home.
And the abuse is in part contingent upon the child being trans?
No. Luckily, not that we've seen yet.
No.
But,
okay, good.
But with legislation like this, then yeah, that is likely to happen, isn't it?
I think it is. Unless we really can pin down this notion of disclosure versus consultation, because the idea that you never tell the parents, as opposed to you work towards a position where the child and the safeguarding expert have created a context in which the child is comfortable with support, talking to the parents who they fear, whose reactions they fear. There's not just two paths here, is there, Frank? There's at least three,
no,
and that third one is there. I just worry that when a sledgehammer like Cami Badenoch inserts herself into the centre of the story, the search for nuance and concern is probably going to be very short.
And then there's another layer to that as well, that when there's that message from the government that they're not in support of trans issues, or at least trans people, they're not in support of that, like independence from them. I mean, we already see bullying in schools towards trans people.
Of course.
And I feel that this is only going to fuel that hatred.
Yeah. I can't. Well, again, it sounds a bit naff, really, to say that I hope that you're wrong, but you're the one dealing with it and working with it. And quite a few of my texts coming in are saying that it's the other children are a bigger problem. And I do think that they're getting their lead from somewhere, whether it's the right-wing media or home, whether it's their own parents or whether it's some members of the Conservative Party. I don't know. Or it's just what I would call traditional bullying. Anybody who displays a difference in some senses paints a target on their back. Kids historically have been bullied for being overweight and or wearing glasses or having ginger hair. So anybody who stands out from the crowd can attract a form of bullying, a form of discrimination. But I don't know what the answer to this is. Except that if you prioritise safeguarding the child who is trans but doesn't want their parents to know, I don't know who really has the right to say, well, we're going to tell them. I really don't, actually. Sarah is in Montreux in Switzerland. You know, for years I thought Montreux was in Canada. I don't know. Well, because it sounds a bit like Montreal. So whenever comedians would say, oh, I'm going to Montreux tomorrow to get a comedy award, and I'd think, crikey, you were back on Tuesday. That was a very quick... But I digress, Sarah. What would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, very much not in Canada.
Thank you for clearing that up, Sarah. It's about fun. Better late than never.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
So, I don't know. I think I'd start with saying I think it's a cheap way for the Tory party to address what they consider a problem.
Yes.
And that in a way that they think will resonate with what they think is their base's sensibilities, I suppose, and as usual not caring for the after effects for the people who are directly concerned. And as usual, it's vulnerable people, which is the case for minors who have very little choice and space to decide where they live, how they can subsist and everything. So, yeah. For me, a good idea would be talking about askability rather than talking about how ashamed the parents should be.
Yeah, I wanted a better word than shame. I really did. But actually, it only popped into my head when I was imagining being in that situation myself. So I'd offer that up as explanation, if not excuse. And also, thanks to Pavel's call in the first hour, I was thinking quite a lot about Catholicism at the time, and the word shame usually pops up fairly quickly when we're thinking about Catholicism. So yes, you're right. There is because for some parents will be heartbroken that their child couldn't come and talk to them about something like this, I think.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk about askability, it's something that you have to develop. It's something that you learn to do. So I used to be a teacher. I taught for 5 years,
right.
11 to 20 years old. And then I decided to swerve completely. And now I'm finishing my master's degree in social work.
Right.
And the subject of my research, my thesis is basically how you deal with sexual health questions with teenagers. So it's pretty, close. And I also work for a non-profit that it defends the rights of LGBTQ people in the canton where I live. So these things knit together quite neatly, actually.
Yes, I can see that.
And yeah, I think it's also a lot, whether it comes to sexual health in the sense of like biomedical and risk and everything, and learning how to have good relationships, and also gender diversity and different sexual identities. Parents just don't know how to open these questions with their kids. Even the most well-intentioned parents don't know how to deal with them.
Good point.
And that's something you have to learn. It's something you just have to learn to do. And if we're not going to support parents to be askable and understand these questions in a way that isn't just driven by the headlines, the salacious headlines that ask for clicks, well, you wind up with kids who know that their parents are not giving them the vibe that they need to feel like they can ask.
And I fell into that trap, I think, today, thinking of it as a fire and brimstone parent who is going to consign their child to the eternal depths of hell, whereas in fact a lot of parents whose children may not want to come and talk to them about this would be more approachable if they'd had more help, if they'd had the askability. I'll read you this quickly. The draft guidance clarifies that schools and colleges do not have to and should not accept all requests for social transition. Where a school considers a request, they should take a very cautious approach. So making it sound like an infectious disease, aren't they, so far, including watchful waiting periods as a sort of form of quarantine, and ensuring parents are fully consulted before any decision is taken. That's where it gets tricky, isn't it, really?
They faffed up the COVID thing. I guess they're trying to be more prudent with this one. But I mean, it's for me, it's a question of really trying to make something an issue that shouldn't really be.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, they try to present, divergent gender identities and sexual orientations as a risk.
Yes.
And the idea that I think there's a lot of danger that's been put behind the word transition for minors, as if it was all going to be, once you put your finger in the mill, you're going to have your whole body taken into it, and then you're going to completely transition medically, and you're going to be operated on by the time you're 13. That's ridiculous. It's not how it happens.
No, but there is a need for vigilance to make sure that it stays being not how it happens, I suppose.
Exactly, but I mean that's why the medical community exists. And instead of having politicians trying to shove their nose into something that they have no idea about really, and try to make it into something where they're going to be scoring points.
There is and it's only one side scoring points as well, because the politicians who've got a problem with this are even more terrified of the topic than I am. I'll read you this from a tweeter who is a doctor, but not, I've just checked actually, not I don't think a medical doctor. As soon as children know that telling a teacher will inevitably result in their parents being told, those who don't want their parents to know will just bottle it up. And that, of course, could cause infinitely worse impacts on the child's mental health than exist at the moment. I can't argue with that, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's allowed a private life starting when you're 18. And before that, children are very vulnerable. They're not really seen legally as full people, which makes sense up to a point because parents are responsible for them. But it also means that their rights are very, very diminished compared to the rest of the population. And they're super at risk for when things do go wrong.
Yeah. And you've, I think, introduced a really important element of this conversation, which is the question of who this legislation is actually designed for, or guidance as opposed to legislation. Who is it designed for? Who are they thinking of when they put together these formulae and, in Kemi Badenoch's words, insist that it is vital parents are informed and involved in the decisions that impact their children's lives? You see, that's an uncontroversial statement with which I could easily agree in other contexts. It is vital that parents are informed and involved in the decisions that impact their children's lives. Until you put in parentheses, on issues that their parents think involve a passport to hell, or are non-existent, or which their parents despise. And that just seems to me to be a really glaring problem until you consider the possibility that it's not a problem at all, which is where the question of who exactly is this guidance designed to address, or even perhaps appease. Thank you, Sarah. It's 11:49.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:52 is the time. Do you know, I think, how can I put this correctly? From the point of view, and in a way we all have skin in the game on this, it's because it's like sexuality. It's a societal issue, not an individual issue or a family issue. But in the context of the media, I shall say, I wonder whether the most pertinent words in this new guidance, this long-awaited transgender guidance, I wonder if the most pertinent words are actually extremely rare. They've said it's extremely rare because to read some newspapers, to listen to some politicians and gobs on sticks, you'd think it was absolutely everywhere. It's extremely rare, the guidance says. Kemi Badenoch says the guidance is needed because activists have hijacked the issue by misinterpreting the law. So that presumably is going to be an extremely rare dimension of the extremely rare phenomenon. You see how mad this is when you dig into it. So the phenomenon itself of social transitioning is extremely rare. Kemi Badenoch has persuaded herself, or has been persuaded, that among those extremely rare occurrences, there will be some extremely rare instances of activists having hijacked the issue by misinterpreting the law. If I was Kemi Badenoch, I would have provided not just examples, but statistics of that. And then, like night following day, Liz Truss pops up to say, it doesn't go far enough and new laws are needed to deal with this extremely rare thing that perhaps hinges on the question of whether a child with a wish that their parent is not told about something has that wish ignored. Not just ignored, but in fact overridden. 11:54 is the time. Chrissy is in Manchester. Chrissy, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
First time caller, so I'm a little bit nervous.
Welcome.
So basically I wanted to transition when I was at school, but because of family life, I couldn't transition at home. It nearly destroyed me. I'm just turned 40 this year, and I only began my transition a few years ago.
Right.
So
tell me, can I ask a bit more about home? I mean, what would have happened if you'd come home and said, Dad or Mum, I think... how would you start the conversation, Chrissy? Would you just say, I think I might be trans? Or...
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say to my mother.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my dad died when I was 11.
Right, I'm sorry.
And my older brother got chucked out of the family home and made to live with his dad because of some issues. So
okay.
My mum's mentally unwell and used to sort of take it out on us, basically, out on the kids. It's a violent home. So I was so scared of coming out and how my mum would react. I thought I could come out and then I'd be put in foster care or something, you know.
Right, yes.
So not having been able to come out at school because of Section 28 was the big thing back then. Banning of the promotion of homosexuality.
Yes.
I saw how gay was used as a slur back then constantly, and I thought, God, I'm trans, you know, what would happen to me if I came out? So I've had drug problems for years. I'm in recovery at the moment.
Well done.
A week's not drinking, actually.
Oh, well done. Tough
you.
time of year to be doing that as well, Chrissy, so hang in there.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm not speaking to my family at the moment. I haven't spoken to them for a couple of years now.
Okay. And that helps, I presume, a bit, does it? I mean, it's a sadness, but in it also helps. You deal with your own mental health. Yeah.
I've had to take a step away from a lot of people and things to sort myself out. It's been a long process get myself to this kind of, to be mentally okay. But yeah,
So how do we greet this then? The idea that, and let's get the words absolutely right, that if you had found whatever the correct word is, I prefer courage, to tell a teacher, you might not like the word courage, you might think that's patronising, that you think you are trans or that you are trans, either of those two things, and then the teacher, the Minister for Women and Equalities says it's vital that your parents are informed and involved in the decisions that impact their children's lives. You already balked at the idea of coming out at home, and this would mean you couldn't do so at school, I presume, and I don't think you could anyway back then.
No, and I was questioning whether I was trans or not.
Yes.
And I think if I got to explore my femininity back then, I would have gone, oh, right, I am. You know, I don't think it would have taken long, but I was scared of coming out and then thinking, oh, no, this isn't for me. And then once, you know, the box, the lift has been, you know, taken the box. If I was had to involve my mum with that, then, and went back to being Chris, then that could have caused all sorts of problems. But I think, you know, at least having a place to explore that safely first
would have been invaluable to you. Thank you for explaining this so clearly for me. And I don't know if it's fair to ask you this question, but can you see any positives in what is being described in the specifics of child-parent-teacher relationships or safeguarding that triangle of relationships there to reduce the protection that the child has from the disclosure, or can you see any plus to it? Like, I mean, the parent who you know, a mum who was a bit more simpatico perhaps than your mum, but you still felt, if you'd gone through a period of consultation and you'd worked out ways and you took advice on how you could approach your mum with it. Do you see what I mean? A different Chrissy in a different universe with a different mum. This might be quite a good idea. Or not. Tell me I'm wrong if you want. Everyone's allowed to.
I can't see how existing sort of duty of care, why that's working. It seems like.
Well, that's what Nancy told us. That's what other safeguarders have told us. Chrissy, thank you. The texts have been surprisingly measured, with a few exceptions. James, I can't believe you, being a parent, wouldn't want to be consulted in your children's decisions. Of course, parents should know, but as one of your callers said, the school and social services needs to make sure the family situation. Oh, you've completely misunderstood me, which is perfectly reasonable. But I just, I mean, of course, I would want to be consulted. The word I used, it probably incorrectly, was shame, to describe how I'd feel if my child didn't want me to know where they were. But of course I'd want to know, crikey. And I would do my best to help and to be supportive and to be kind. And if they felt I wouldn't be any of those things, I would be ashamed. But no, gosh, I'm not advocating for nobody ever being told. I'm just wondering about the children who don't want their parents to know. And I'm sure that neither of us, or I hope that neither of us would be in that category. It's 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12 is the time. Territory now that is a little bit close to something that is perhaps turning into my all-time favourite subject. And it is that relationship between class and aspiration, or indeed social mobility. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. Talking about, well, you know what I'm talking about. Sorry, I just got a bit distracted there. I shall reel myself back in. I couldn't remember what the word was. The word is grit. Teaching grit does not close results gap for poorer pupils. I think this is another conversation about public school swagger, which you know I find fascinating for a whole variety of reasons. But research has shown that teaching character and resilience is unlikely to play a major part in eradicating the attainment gap between disadvantaged pupils and their wealthier peers, right? So this is the idea that the confidence
there's a thin line between confidence and entitlement, and we'll talk about where that line may be another day. But the confidence you can instill in a young person will actually make them more socially mobile. Actually, it turns out that the relative underperformance of disadvantaged students has little to do with them lacking the attitude or mindset of their wealthier peers. This is research undertaken at Cambridge, Zurich, and I'll probably pronounce this one wrong as well, Tübingen University. They looked at 240,000 15-year-olds across 74 countries, looking at difference in size. It's good for the kids to be taught to focus on character and resilience and other issues, but it doesn't lead to improvements necessarily, either in the classroom or afterwards. Children from wealthier backgrounds were found to have higher levels of socio-emotional skills on average. The impact of the discrepancy on the overall achievement was modest. So if disadvantaged pupils had the same social and emotional skills as their wealthier peers, the gap would only close by about 9% and probably less. So let me leave aside the academic jargon and tell you what I think this research is about. You know what will happen. Dr. Rob Grietes of the University of Cambridge will ring in and tell me that I've got it all wrong. But I think it seems to be saying that the things that you can do in the classroom to increase a child's confidence will be good for the child, but they won't actually translate into better performance. Which leads me into a subject I've been wanting to talk to you about for a long time. It's not directly linked, but it's certainly tangentially linked. I remember this story. I remember it from about, it must be almost 30 years ago when, and the reason I know it was that long ago, because it was at a time in my life when I didn't take minicabs or taxis very often. I can't remember what the reason was that I was in a minicab. But I was, and the minicab driver told me a story. Now, it may not have been true. I had no reason to doubt it, but the story stayed with me. And it was a story about his athletics career as a younger person. And he told me that up until the age of about 13 or 14, he would, at athletics meetings, routinely give Sebastian Coe a run for his money. And he would even perhaps beat him quite regularly. As I say, I've got no proof that this was true, but I don't think even Sebastian Coe won every running race he went in from the age of 7 onwards. And then this chap who was telling me the story, for reasons that I don't recall, and he may not even have shared with me, as I said, it's nearly 30 years ago, he told me that he'd been taken into care and his athletics career dropped off a cliff. People were just not taking him to meets. I think his motivation probably diminished, and that was that. And Sebastian Coe went on to be one of the most famous athletes this country has ever produced. Subsequently, of course, a Conservative MP, which must have really, really hacked off Oliver Dowden, mustn't it? Do you think he knows that Sebastian Coe ended up as chairman of the Conservative? Talk about not staying in your lane. I suppose literally, well, not for middle distance runners. They never stay in their lane. But has anyone checked on Oliver Dowden lately? Because he has such a fit of the vapours at the prospect of Gary Lineker expressing a political opinion when he finds out that Ian Botham is not only in the House of Lords but also a trade envoy to Australia, and that Sebastian Coe ended up in Parliament as a Tory MP and, if memory serves, as chairman of the actual Conservative Party. Oliver Dowden is going to have an embolism, isn't he? I talk about not staying in your lane. 9 minutes after 12 is the time. And I always remember that story, because I am obsessed with the path not taken, as you know. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by. And that has made all the difference. It's partly a duality of being adopted. I've told you this before. I think it is partly the knowledge that there's another me in an alternative universe who didn't get adopted by my mum and dad. I'd still be me, biologically, genetically. I'd still be me, naturally, but nurturally, if that's even a word, I don't know that I would be. Well, I wouldn't be, would I? I'd be different. I'd have a different accent. I'd have probably different enthusiasms. I'd certainly have a different education. I'd have all sorts of differences. So who would be me? How much? I feel a bit like Trigger's broom now. You look it up. It's one of the funniest things ever on British television. But I would spoil it by trying to tell you in my own words. So what I'm touching on is this weird thing that I think you either understand perfectly or know nothing about. It's so strange. And I think it's got worse in the course of the last 80 years or so because, for example, I suppose the nature of journalism has changed. So when my dad, as a 15-year-old school leaver with no qualifications, decided that he wanted to be a journalist, nobody laughed. You know, his mum, I think one of the regulars in her pub was from a paper up the road, so he got a month's tea making duties and managed to essay that into some paid work and off he went. But I grew up in a world where if you said you wanted to be Prime Minister, people would just nod and go, yes, I can see that. You're very good at debating. You think about what Eton College is like, where you'd say, do you know, when I grow up, I'd quite like to be Prime Minister. And they'd say, well, we've already had 20. Give or take, I forget the precise number. I think that's what stories like this are about. I think you can teach all the swagger in the world, but the relationship between ambition and environment is something that I would love to see better explored. So that's why I'm thinking of that minicab driver this morning. You know, but for a notch on a dial, but for a slight flutter of a butterfly's wings in the Amazon forest, this chap that you've never heard of before and never will again could have been the Olympic gold medalist. And Sebastian Coe would have had a silver or a bronze, depending on what sort of form Steve Ovett was on that day. So that's what I want to talk about. And I need your help a bit, as ever, with these sort of conversations, because I've only really got the experiences of my own life to draw on. But I look around at this notion of entitlement or public school swagger, and I'll tell you what it gives people. It gives them the belief that they can do anything. Now, some parents try to do that. My parents tried to do that, but I don't know that they can do it in quite the same way that a school can. If you're at a school and you say, do you know, I'd quite like to be a architect, for example, and no one in the classroom knows an architect. No, the teachers, I always remember you telling me stories about careers teachers, essentially telling you to know your place. You sometimes see it in the origin stories of exceptional actors or something, where a careers teacher has told them they should be happy with the job down at the local factory. The relationship, I might even jot that down, the relationship between ambition and environment is probably one of the most important indicators of how your life will go. So some ambitions are ridiculous. For example, I am prepared to admit at this stage in proceedings that I was never going to play in goal for Nottingham Forest or play Hamlet at Stratford because I wasn't good enough. It doesn't matter how desperately I dreamed or how hard I worked, or I suppose, you know, if it was North Korea and my dad was in charge, he could have paid someone to put me in the position. Have you ever seen that stuff on YouTube? There's a lad whose dad bought a football team and stuck him in the side. He's absolutely shockingly poor, but his dad owned the football team, and there you go. But apart from that happening, it was never going to happen. So those ambitions don't count. But ambitions... And, you know, I would include sport in this, actually, because sport has a hell of a lot to do with access. It's a great-looking new film coming up. I saw it on the trailers last night. We had a traditional family outing last night, went to see one of the great classic Christmas movies of all time, Die Hard. And there was a trailer for a film called The Boys in the Boat, which I think is one of those tales of, you know, lads from the wrong side of the track taking on the toffs at their own game. And I don't know how it ends, but it'd be a pretty disappointing film if they don't win. But imagine that. Imagine rowing. How you do that? You're growing up in relatively humble circumstances, and you decide that you want to be a rower or a sailor. What's going to? I mean, you just people are going to laugh at you. So I want to know how. I mean, the rare call, I think, the one I probably won't get, but I'd love to. How much more do you have to do to realise an ambition like that if you're not privileged? Now, it could be an architect. It could be a city trader. Although you've got that Essex way into the city as well, haven't you? Which I know a little bit about. You could, you wanted to be. Do you see what I mean? You just have. What's the word I'm looking for? Belief. I think it's even simpler than belief. You have an ambition as a youngster, and when you share that ambition, nobody laughed, and you don't realise, because you're like me and you're privileged. You don't realise that if you had expressed that ambition at a school 2 miles down the road or in the house round the corner, people would have laughed. Oh, you want to be an author? You can't even write a birthday. Do you see? Am I making sense? Because I think this is more important, actually, than confidence or swagger. There's an element here of you cannot be what you cannot see. You need examples, you need role models, you need someone who looks and sounds like you to be doing something to help you believe that you could do it too. But that's not enough either. You need to be in a place where you won't get laughed at. So who am I asking to ring in? I think I'm asking you to ring in if you can tell me what it's like when they laugh. Ideally, you'll be able to tell me that you pulled it off anyway and they're not laughing now. Unless, of course, your ambition was to be a stand-up comedian, in which case you would hope that... That's not my joke, by the way. They laughed when I told them I wanted to be a stand-up comedian. Well, they're not laughing now. But also, actually, the rest of us need to join in on this as well. It's not just people who had to just work that bit harder, go that bit further to achieve their ambitions. It's about whether you recognise what I am describing. It's about what it's like. It's about the question of whether you agree with me that the relationship between ambition and environment is probably one of the most important things in life. And yet we've never talked about it before. And we're only talking about it today because it has popped out of some research that's not specifically addressing this actual issue. But there it is. The relationship between ambition and environment. So think about what your ambition was when you were, say, 15 or 20, right? And now think about your environment. And now wonder whether that ambition would have unfolded in the way that it has if you had been in a different environment. So if you had been in a less privileged environment, are you honest enough to admit that ambition probably wouldn't have been realised? And if you had been in a more privileged environment, do you honestly know in your bones that ambition would actually have been realised? Because I'll tell you something for nothing. If Jacob Rees-Mogg can become a cabinet minister, then maybe I could have actually played in goal for Nottingham Forest. I guess that the skill set is just so specific, and the inadequacies on a football pitch or a stage are so obvious that you wouldn't be able to get away with it in the way that someone as obviously inadequate as Jacob Rees-Mogg somehow managed to be a senior politician. 18 minutes after 12 is the time. So there it is. The relationship between ambition and environment. It's huge, and yet we never, ever acknowledge it. It plays directly into the born 3-0 up and think they've scored a hat-trick school of thought, doesn't it? How many people born 3-0 up want to admit that actually, were it not for the silver spoon or the education or the privilege that they inherited or had paid for by their parents, it would be 0-0, or possibly even they'd be 1-0 down.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 12. Nick in Nottingham says, James, we need a keeper at Forest. You don't still have your boots, do you? Mate, you don't need me. And someone sent me this line of Mickey Flanagan's, the superb comedian Mickey Flanagan. I think it's a real line. And it involves a teacher at his school saying, "You effing dreamer, Hutton, you will never drive a van. This school is here to provide the people who carry the stuff to the van. And a good friend of mine has been in touch to say just having ambition in itself would have been enough to get you laughed at when I was at school, which is a conversation that we've had together in the past. He is one of the people I think of when I think of these sort of issues, because if he'd gone to a school like mine, I don't know what he'd be doing now, but he would have, and he may be doing what he is doing now, because he's doing great. But the doors that he would have had in front of him when choosing which ones to go through would have been countless. So there it is, ambition and environment, the relationship between ambition and environment. You know, if I was going to get political, I think I'd even suggest that the reason why we don't talk about this so much, well, actually, I'm not going to tell you yet. You've probably worked it out already. Why don't we talk about this more? Why do you think, James? It's like giving away the secrets of an unequal society. Claire's in Fleet. Claire, what would you like to say?
Hello. Sorry, I'm very nervous.
It's only me.
I've got three. I know. I've got three examples. Twice when I was at school, and then again when I went for my first job. The first time happened when I was in my form class at school. I lived on the Isle of Wight at the time, and I didn't want to go to university because that would have involved moving off of the Isle of Wight, and I wasn't comfortable doing that. Okay. So I'd worked out a way of becoming a legal secretary.
Right.
This is what I wanted to do at the time. I was about, 13, 14. Okay. And the form teacher, I'll never forget her. She was such a stern woman, and she said, so when do you think you'll qualify then if you do it this route you've imagined? And I said, it'll be about when I'm 26. And she laughed in my face and said, don't be stupid. You'll be married with 2 kids around your ankles by then.
Gosh.
And that was the end of that.
It's not exactly inspiring, is it?
No.
She wasn't exactly Miss Jean Brodie, I don't think. Not Teacher of the Year award.
No, definitely not. And then later when I decided, still not mature enough and didn't feel comfortable enough moving off the island permanently, I decided I was going to go to university in Portsmouth. I'd be the first in my family to do so. And I said that I'd picked Portsmouth, and my history teacher laughed in my face. But I did it anyway.
Oh, well done.
And then thank you. And then whilst I was at university, I discovered a love of writing, and I also loved ice sport and ice hockey. Yeah. My local newspaper articles weren't very good, so I faxed in my own, and I said, I think this is better. I was there. And the editor rang me up, and he was like, oh, well, we can use your reports. I said, well, I'd like my byline on it, please.
Well done.
And he laughed in my face.
Really?
And 3 years later, I was working there as a junior reporter. And 5 years later, I was the sports editor.
Brilliant. So you had the drive regardless of the... I have, this question's a little bit... I don't know. I'm going to be a bit uncomfortable asking it. But what if people had been giving you... Because this is a success story, Claire. But the whole topic is about, in a way, where you would be now if every one of those experiences you'd had been the opposite. If every time you'd spread your wings or reached for the stars... I'm turning into a karaoke tribute. Every time you'd reach for the stars... You'd been encouraged. You'd been encouraged and told that you would, you know.
Yeah, I think it was very much. I realised very quickly that I was alone, if you know what I mean. If I wanted to get it, I'd have to do it myself.
Yes.
Like my parents, my parents were split up. My mum was disabled, living on the benefits. My dad, who was estranged from my mum, refused to do the means testing, so I had to pay full fees at university. Yeah. I paid for it all myself. I worked 3 jobs whilst I was at university. But I was determined because I was like, no, I want this, and I have to get it. But I do think there was a lot of people that were quite happy to watch me fall.
Yeah,
and
but also you worked.
Oh well, do you know what I mean?
You worked 10 times. You worked 10 times harder, clearly, to get to the same place than somebody who'd been born with a more privileged background, or someone who had been raised in an environment. I'm thinking more of school than home, where this was encouraged. That's the point. I think that's why we never talk about it, because nobody ever wants to admit it. Nobody. You remember when we talk about private education, and people always say, well, I work bloody hard to send my child to that school. And you sort of think, well, what do you think the person over the road does all day who could never afford to send your child to that school? Do you think they just sit there, eating twiglets? That idea, it's one of the first gigs I ever did. Before I was even on LBC, I did a show for Radio 5 live. It was like a post-Big Brother experiment. and we got a bunch of people from all different backgrounds to come in and have political debates, and they'd be voted off one by one. It's actually quite a good idea. Like, I might bring it back. I wonder who owns the format. Anyway, there was one person there who was adamant that going to private school and being in the sort of environment that I grew up in didn't give you any advantages at all in life. And I was on a scholarship, I worked bloody hard, and you just sort of think, the fact that your parents even knew that scholarships existed puts you in a even then it sort of stuck in my craw a bit, and that was over 20 years ago. Thank you, Claire. 12:26 at the time. Joe's in Stroud. Joe, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think my sort of career path was hugely influenced by my upbringing.
Yeah.
My parents were really very religious,
Okay.
and therefore sort of drummed into me the idea of being humble and, accepting my lot, and God will give you just what you need and no more. And it affects me in two ways. Firstly, I was brilliant at cricket as a little lad, and I used to I won an award for playing. And several years later, or actually about 5 years ago, and I'm almost 50 now, my best friend was having a conversation with the cricket coach who trained me, and said, yeah, that little Joe is a brilliant cricketer, but he had absolutely no ambition. Yeah, and I think it kind of, my parents, let me go to cricket, but they never really pushed me or encouraged me to excel at it, because they sort of had this idea about not sort of being too big for your boots and that kind of thing. But then another sort of flip side of that is when I was at school, I went to grammar school, and when I was applying for university, I wanted to go and do sound engineering, and I came top in politics in my final year, and I basically, the teachers and my parents said, no, you shouldn't do that. You need to go and do an academic subject. You're too good to sort of do something vocational, because I was excelling academically. And so I did sort of scratched around. I actually went to LSE, would you believe it? Your alma mater.
No good will come of that.
And I did all right. I've done all right in life, but I'm probably not doing what I wanted to do.
That's the opposite in a way. That's well, it isn't, is it? That's a sort of a hierarchy of aspiration that's not fair, because it's not looking at what you're good at and what you would excel at. It's looking at what society, from their point of view, values more. A proper degree. It's like that Maureen Lipman character talking about anology, isn't it? Whereas the cricket thing, what did you feel when you heard him describe you as not ambitious, or you heard
really upset?
I bet it did.
Because I feel as if I now do a job which, I'm successful, I'm a director in a company.
Good.
But I'm deeply, deeply stressed, because I'm not doing what I love.
Really?
So I get by. I'm successful because, when you have a certain amount of aptitude, you do best at what, you do your best at it. So I've managed to achieve, but very stressed and
you've crammed yourself into a hole that is a different shape from you.
Yeah. Exactly that.
And you probably wouldn't have done that if your parents had raised you to believe that the sky was the limit and that you can do whatever you want.
Exactly. Whether that be academic or vocational.
Or vocational. How good were you? How good were you at cricket?
Well, when I was about sort of 12, 13, I played for Kent once, and was a really fast bowler.
So if you'd had, I mean, that combination of say I want to play for England one day, and people around you saying that's possible, you could do that. But they'd have to be at home as well, wouldn't they?
Yeah, exactly, because your parents influence you so much.
And they'd have to be at home.
Easy to blame your parents, isn't it? But when you're young, they're one of your biggest influences.
Or you don't go all Philip Larkin on me, Joe. Or you have an extraordinary experience at school, but that's 100 times more likely to happen I know you went to grammar, but at a public school. So if you went to my school and you were pretty good at rugby, the bloke that was head of rugby used to play for England. So if you said I'm going to be an international rugby player one day, no one would think that you were getting too big for your boots, or that you were. I mean, that's an extraordinary comparison, actually. I'd forgotten that because he was my French teacher. He taught me French. That's why I still speak French in a Yorkshire accent. But he played fullback for England in that famous game at Cardiff Arms Park when we beat Wales. And therefore, off the top of my head, there's 3 lads who were around my age at school who went on to play international rugby, 2 for Ireland and 1 for England. I bet if they'd gone to your school, they wouldn't have done.
No.
Whoa, thank you, mate. Thank you for that, because it's a funny one, isn't it, the path not taken? I think that's Robert Frost. There you go, Philip Larkin and Robert Frost. Those are the kind of literary references that my parents paid a fortune for. Amelia Cox is here now with your news headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:33 is the time. The relationship between ambition and background or environment, whatever you prefer, is, I would argue, I know we've touched on these issues a million times together, but the sheer importance of it, and the reason why we don't talk about it, for example, the media and the political establishment don't talk about it anywhere near as much as they talk about, I don't know, trans issues or small boats, is because it would give the lie to the whole of our society, wouldn't it? So just imagine if you had the same talents and the same aptitudes, and you'd grown up in an environment where people were constantly telling you and truly believing that you could be anything you wanted to be, where would you be now? As opposed to know your place. So that is, I think, probably the biggest thing that parents pay for when we send our children to fee-paying schools. Just that you can maybe do some of it at home, but you can't do all of it at home. Then you can't be what you cannot see. 12:34 is the time. Catherine's in Torquay. Catherine, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah,
Hello.
I was just ringing because there was a couple of things that resonated with me on your
Good.
topic. First of all, I work at a local university, and in this specific area where we run programs for school students to encourage them to apply to university and give them contextual offers to mitigate for the fact of their environment not being as privileged. So students are young carers, care leavers, disabled, from low-income families, low participation neighbourhoods, free school meals, those sorts of things.
Thank you. How big a part of your job is it to persuade people?
That's my whole job. So
Right.
I've worked in that for the last 3 years, but also teaching before that students from disadvantaged, supporting them with study skills and things. But my whole job now is to run a programme that supports those students, and we must have about 1,000 students a year from across the country come onto our programmes, and then we would give them, if they complete those programmes, which is just attending kind of lectures and getting more familiar with the campus, we would give them contextual offers, so grade reductions and bursaries and scholarships to support them. So it's funny you say not many people speak about it, but for me, it's my whole.
It's your daily life. Well, I was asking more. I was asking more about how much effort you have to put into persuading the young people that they should do this. So how much resistance you come up against to the idea that they can do this. You need to say, no, of course it's for people like you.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I guess it's it's sometimes not reaching the most kind of students from the most deprived areas.
Sure.
Because as I was saying to the person on the phone before, within education and where we are in a deprived area in the southwest, we see lots of students that are in such kind of worse off conditions that they never get to that point where they're able to think about their future and think about their potential. So, and my husband's a lecturer, and he works with those kind of students that aren't even at that point. Whereas for me, the students are applying for these programs, so they're kind of halfway there, but they've got some sort of disadvantage. But yeah, for other students, we were saying, you've got Maslow's hierarchy of need in education, where you're looking at the bottom, just food, shelter, love, sense of belonging, before you have to have those blocks, underneath you before you can get
before you can move on to the more
so that bit's really difficult in education, especially in these in more deprived areas, to get the students to that point. But I guess for me, I'm lucky that the students are kind of they are already,
so they're quite motivated in a way before they get to you. Finally, Catherine, when we, if I've understood you correctly, you would put an environmental issue on the same page for this form of mobility as a disability or something like that. They're both going to be having a similar effect upon a young person.
Absolutely. We think a lot about social, emotional kind of issues as well. And me personally, another reason I wanted to ring in, you say, where would we be? I always imagine I'd be on Strictly Come Dancing as a special dancer, because I was adopted. I was in care till I was 6, and that left really quite a lot of traumatic kind of self-esteem issues and emotional. And that's why we work with young care leavers, and I was always into theatre and dancing at such a young age. But as I grew up and into those awkward teenage years, I never had the self-confidence to go, I was just shy, wouldn't, say boo to a goose. And even though I was desperate to do those things, I was just too crippled by,
And that's chicken and egg, isn't it? Because you have been like that if you had been raised differently? If your child probably not. Probably you would have felt a little bit more entitled to the kind of stuff that you were intimidated by.
Yeah, or just had the confidence and not worried about if people like you, or do you look stupid? Or I guess all people go through those things, but with care leavers, it is on a different kind of level because you have that rejection kind of issues and things, and so that's why. You could argue that public school boys do as well, because they've been sent away to boarding school by their parents. This is a therapist's goldmine, but of course we are taught to tamp down all those feelings and to silence any questions of self-doubt with questions of self-assurance, and that is, I think, a neat explanation of how you can end up with people like Boris Johnson and David Cameron in charge of an entire country, when certainly in Johnson's case you're categorically and clearly unfit to be so, but you believe that it is your birthright. 12:39 is the time. Sam is in Walthamstow. Sam, what would you like to say?
Your question was really good. So
thank you. First time for everything, Sam.
I just wanted to ask you a question first. So initially, if somebody tells you can't do something, what is your immediate follow-on thought?
Yeah, I push back immediately. I say, yes, I flipping can. I mean, in fact, even here, and this is a little bit childish of me, but if, for example, there would be a bit of pressure to not return to a subject that we'd done yesterday or that someone had done elsewhere, that would make me more likely to do it, which is pathetic, right?
Where do you think you got that from?
Well, there's two. I don't normally let people do this, Sam. I know I'm normally very quick to insist that I ask the questions, but
proving my point.
I think you've set. Yes, it is proving your point. I think you've set two hairs running here rather than one, because I think that pushing back against authority is a little bit different to self-belief. So you've picked the pushing back against authority part of my personality, which is a little bit childish, whereas the believing that I can do so, I've actually missed.
No, you are. You're correct.
And the second one, I
don't know where that comes from.
No,
personally,
no.
I had quite an authoritarian mother.
Right.
My dad wasn't around. Came from a kind of deprived area, working class, but saw everything. Like, I guess I was born into seeing that life is hard.
Yeah,
and then if you think life is hard, then you just know, then it's just about accepting that and then just working hard, right? Logically. Yes. And I'm not sure, when you mentioned previously that at your little round table, somebody said that being from a public school is actually somewhat of a disadvantage, or it doesn't necessarily give you an advantage.
Yeah, I thought that was Rolex. That was her trying to. There was a radio show I did years ago. That was her trying to convince herself that her success was entirely self-generated, such as the success was entirely self-generated. So it's the born 3-0 up, but you think you scored a hat-trick school of thought. You might actually end up 4-0 up, but you were born 3-0 up, if you see what I mean. So
yeah, of course.
But that's natural. You say to me, there's no earthly way. I love this job. I'm very proud to have it, and I love doing it. I am fulfilled. If you said to me, there's no way you'd be doing that if you hadn't been to the school that you went to, I think that 10, 15 years ago, I'd have pushed back against you. Now I would completely agree. I'd shake you by the hand and say, well done, Sherlock. You got it. So there's a lot of stuff going on.
There is a lot of stuff. I think environment is definitely very key, but there is something internal within every human being, because we are human beings.
Yeah.
That kind of, that you essentially, whether or not you get a chip on your shoulder, I think is actually a great thing. If you can get a chip on your shoulder really young, then that can be fuel.
And it also depends what you call it. You call it a chip on the shoulder. Someone calls it something to prove. You've got something to prove. Yeah. You're a man in a hurry.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if that can be taught necessarily, or if you're born with it, or if you just observe and then you kind of get annoyed about the sort of social injustice or the plight of the working class, and you just use that as fuel, as like, well, I'm going to be the working class hero for my area or something. But there's no I think it's hard to decipher exactly where it comes from. It's definitely a range of places. But I think one interesting example is, this is quite outsized, but is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Came from a very, very small town, somehow just saw one bodybuilder and realized, oh, this is what I want to do. And then because he saw that bodybuilder in films, was like, oh, I can use the bodybuilding to go into films.
Yeah.
And then, even though in his example, he always constitutes it down to his environment, the fact that he had people around him that were kind of supporting.
But you're right,
him
he still needed to be possessed of something extraordinary.
Indeed.
But without the environment, so the ambition is there, and it's an extraordinary ambition. And I loved his new book, but I'm never entirely sure. And he doesn't fall into this trap. But some people who've enjoyed great success in life, when they tell their stories almost in a self-help format, you sort of think, well, you're denying the extraordinary element of your own makeup. You're just teaching us all the bits that we do have control over, and you're ignoring the bit that we don't. He doesn't do that. But would he have one without the other? If he hadn't had the people around him helping him, he wouldn't have got to where he got. And if he hadn't had that extraordinary drive and impulse. What made you ring in? Because you've been quizzing me. Where do you fit into these equations?
I guess, well, the time that it really makes sense is I was probably like 25. I had a really bad drug addiction. I had no job. Right. So work out how to fuel that one. And then I just had this idea. I was like, I need to buy a house, because if I buy a house, then I can pay my mum's mortgage and I can move out and kind of pay for myself. And everyone around me was just like, oh, you're stupid. I mean, where did you get this idea from?
Yeah.
And that was enough fuel. Like, just the vision gave me fuel, and then everyone telling me that I didn't like anything, that it was impossible, was just even more fuel. And then I went off, and after many, many years, eventually pulled it off. But
brilliant.
You do have to kind of, I think the only thing I really learned along that path is, that just like with social influence on social media, you have to really control the people that you're around. And
well, but that's a gift as well, Sam. I mean, how many people can actually do that? How many people can make the conscious effort to put themselves in an environment that is encouraging as opposed to discouraging? Crikey. That's a slightly unfamiliar experience for me. That it came straight in, got me right up on the other end of the phone line from where I would normally feel that I was sitting. Thank you, mate. 12:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. I'm really pleased we did this today, and I'm really pleased that we've pushed some of the buttons that we tried to push, because I think it is. It's probably harder for someone at my end of the telescope to be clear-eyed about the importance of this relationship between ambition and environment than it is for people in the position of most of our callers. Here's a first. It says on my screen, Fatima on the way to the BBC Sports Personality of the Year Awards, which is the first time we've had that location offered up. And it rather narrows down the numbers of Fatimas that it could be. Fatima Whitbread, of course, herself an Olympic champion.
Hello, how are you?
Very well. What made you pick up the phone?
Well, I'm a very big advocate for children in the care system, and I'm doing an awful lot of work as we speak, both for the care system sector and for the children who are most vulnerable, children and young people. And we've got to really celebrate their remarkable resilience that they show in the face of adversity, because a lot of these children arrive in the care system sector, and they have what is unfortunately stigmatisation. They arrive with a set of particular issues with emotional and trauma and abandonment and neglect. And I can tell you, as somebody who lived in the care system for 14 years, abandoned as a baby, and then spent my first 14 years in children's homes, it's really important that you find good role models for these young people and give them the opportunity of having better life outcomes. Now, part of that, obviously, is for young children like me. When I was in the children's home, I had a very good auntie who I called my bright shining star. And then and she used to be like, we called her the tickle monster. So basically, she'd come into children's home and I'd wait under the bed sheets for her to tickle me. Until she tickled me, I wouldn't get up. So I'd probably still be there now. No, but the fact is, Dan, is that a lot of these children, they need help. They need the opportunity of giving them, life's chances.
How does that work? Because it's easy to say, but for you to believe that when someone tells you that you can reach for the stars, for you to believe it, that's the trick, isn't it?
It is. I mean, for me, care leavers, we hear often now, 18 is when they leave, go into independent living. That's far, far too young. Most conventional families, 28-year-old, children, and that's a big, vast difference for emotional growth, skills, and skilling people up ready for adulthood. And for 18, that's quite young. So, no, for me, let me explain to you, sport was my saviour.
Yes.
And for a lot of these children, it's finding someone who they can connect with, who can give them, as a role model, ideas as to what it is that they can truly believe they can become, who and what they want to become, and that, at the end of the day, I watched Mary Peters when I was 11 years old win the Munich Olympics in 1972. And as I said, sport was my saviour, because a lot of these kids that live in the care system, they find it emotionally disturbing. They can't get at their process the situation very well. And just to have a role model that is something that's so important, whether it be a teacher, whether it be, someone who lives in the care home with them, or even just a forever friend. They call a forever friend, someone who's looking out for them, like an auntie or an uncle, because we all have our auntie, uncles and nans and
someone
granddad.
Who believes in you. Someone
who believes in you and is going to share that moment with you, encourage you.
When was the first time you said to someone, because presumably you were still in care when it happened, was the first time you said to yourself or to someone outside, to someone else, that you were going to win an Olympic medal one day, or you were going to break the world record one day?
It's very simple. When I was 14, I played in a netball match, and sport, as I said, was my saviour.
Yeah.
And I can remember this match was a cup match, and I was raising my voice, encouraging my team as a captain, and nowadays you'd call them mentors. Back then they called them a pain in the ass. And the whistle went, and the lady said to the umpire, "Young lady, any more of that and you'll be off." Well, this happened a couple of times, and then after that I joined the local athletic club, because that was the end of the netball season.
Right.
And I wanted to throw the javelin, and I saw this tall blonde guy, and I went over there. I thought, he's interesting. So I picked the javelin up, and he said, "You can't do that. You have to wait for the javelin coach." So in the stand waiting and the toe tapping, like all these kids, survivors in homes, they're a bit feisty. And then I was told, "Oh, here comes the javelin coach." And as this person walked across the infield, I looked and I did a double take. Oh my God, that's that same umpire on the netball court who told me off, yeah. And so this is a true story. And she came across, and I was introduced, and she said, "I know who you are." She said, "You're that Fatima Whitbread." She said, "You're Fatima, aren't you?" She said, "That any of that cheek that you showed on the netball court, you won't be throwing a javelin here."
Gosh.
And my story each week. Ask mum and dad to come up. You've got some talent. Let's get you on, a certain javelin and boots, and let's get you in a competition program. And I would just nod my head. So then she said to the shot put coach, Jack Grinney, "What's wrong with Fatma's hearing? Has she got a problem with her hearing?" So I said, "No, why is that?" He said, "Well, every time I ask her to bring mum and dad up," he said, "Don't you know, she's one of the kids in the children's home."
Oh.
So with that, she gave me a javelin boots and a javelin the following week. She said, "These boots might be too big for you." She said, "I've had somebody who's retired. Stuff them with paper," she said, "and you'll be able to throw."
Good grief.
So within I took the boots back, and I was showing one of the house aunties in the home, and I smashed the French windows. And so I was always getting in trouble because I was outspoken with looking after the other kids. So I got a month's ban from going out. And then one of the schoolgirls came back who was in her team, said, "Mrs. Whitbread thinks you're bunked off and sold the boots and javelin. You're not interested anymore." So I thought, I can't have this. So I went into the front room at 2 o'clock one morning, got out of my ignorance and air malumbrats. I put, "Dear Mrs. Whitbread, sorry I can't come to the track anymore and throw the javelin. Only I smashed the French windows. But one day I want to be the best javelin thrower in the world." And I stuck it down, and I put Mrs. Whitbread St. Chad's School, posted it through the post box the following day, and it took a couple of weeks, and then I heard the phone go when I was in the garden, and I put my ear to the window, and I heard the house auntie saying, no, she can't come up, she's been really naughty." But Mrs. Whitbread must have been quite persistent, and within a week I was back at the track throwing, And then she said to me, would I like to meet the family, have tea? And then a week after that, she said, during the summer holidays, she said, why don't you come and stay with us for a couple of weeks? And at the end of that couple of weeks, I met her 2 boys and Mr. Whitbread. And Greg and Kirk were only 4 and 2. And Greg said to his mum when I was leaving, "Oh God, do we have to take Fatima back to the shop?"
Oh.
And so, but by the time I got back to the children's home, Mrs. Whitbread said to me, "How about?" She said, "Would you like to come and live with us?" She said, "And be a Whitbread." And so, the moral of the story here, right, Dan, is to say there are some incredible people out there, and fate has it. And if you give a child some hope and there's a little bit of luck, there's nothing they can't achieve. Because you know the history of my story.
I do. Well, I know more about it now. And I suppose the point is that the more opportunities you have and the more people you meet, the more likely you are to find the one that can change your life. You've taken me up to the end. We've almost run out of time, but thank you for that.
Thank you. Watch
also,
BBC tonight. BBC
I will. Well, you're a former winner.
Sorry, James.
That's all right. Don't worry.
I'm a former winner, James. But watch tonight, and please go on FatimasCampaign.com and support me to help change and rejuvenate the care system sector help these young people, because that's exactly what you're talking about. Exactly what I'm doing.
If when you've got time, we'll get you on my podcast as well, so we can talk about this in a lot more detail.
Yes, James. Thank you very much.
I'd love that. Thank you, Fatima Whitbread. Well, what a story. Well, I didn't know half of that, and I thought I knew quite a lot about her career. That's it now. I'm glad she called me James at the end. She called me Dan for the first 4 times.
Okay. I worked with somebody for about 8 years who called me Carmel every day. I didn't have the heart to tell him.
There comes a point where you can't, doesn't there?
I think he just saw an Irish face and thought, I'll have a stab at Carmel.
That'll do. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back to the whole show podcast on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. You'll find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as the best video clips from LBC and other global stations. Pause and rewind live radio on Global Player, where you're always in control. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you very much, James.
James O'Brien on LBC.